Welcome everyone that's kind of piling in. We're just going to wait maybe a minute or so. Okay. Well, and numbers are still going up. I'm going to actually turn off my video screen so you guys don't have to watch me watch you too. So we'll be back in just a minute as people continue to pile in. Okay, I'm back. Welcome everyone. Our back end was a quick one today, so thanks for being patient. Welcome into this virtual space that many of you are familiar with by now. This is another off-season or MBF Plus event, and we're holding it in partnership, as always, with Fact and Fiction Books here in Missoula, Montana. My name is Lauren Korn. I am the director of the Montana Book Festival. And as usual, I do want to take care of some kind of quick housekeeping details before I turn the event over to our guests tonight, Malcolm Brooks and Ron Fitzgerald. The first thing I want to say that if you're interested in purchasing copies of Malcolm's book, Cloudmaker, this is an advanced copy, but hardcovers are in stores now. I urge you to purchase your copy from Fact and Fiction Books. They have agreed to donate 10% of all book sales of festival titles like Cloudmaker back to the festival. So go to factandfictionbooks.com and be sure to enter MBF at checkout. Again, 10% of those sales will come back to us. And while you're there, you might want to pick up one of these really wonderful Fact and Fiction Montana CLTs I'm proudly sporting today. I also want to give a special shout out to one of our MBF Plus sponsors tonight. LMG Security has generously sponsored this month of Zoom events. We have 3 this month and instead of our regular 2. And we couldn't be more grateful to LMG Security and our other sponsors. It takes both a lot of time and money to run these events each month. And we're so happy that other businesses, other organizations want to help us out. So again, thank you to LMG Security. If you, audience, anyone in the audience, are interested in sponsoring a month of MBF Plus events, feel free to email me directly at montanabookfestival@gmail.com. And I should say, when just talking about, ordering your copy, tonight we're actually giving away a finished copy of Malcolm's book to a lucky audience member. So on your mark, get set, go, the first person to send me their mailing address to montanabookfestival@gmail.com will claim that copy. So again, it's montanabookfestival@gmail.com. Just send me your mailing address. First person gets a copy. When it comes to this event, navigating tonight's event, feel free to submit any questions you have for Malcolm and Ron via the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Here on the back end of things, we'll be reading your questions, hanging out in the chat as well. Be sure to send your specific questions to the Q&A. You can certainly talk in the chat, but send your questions to the Q&A so that we know to look specifically there. And Malcolm and Ron will address them when they can. And with all that ramble over, I'd like to introduce you to Malcolm and Ron. Malcolm Brooks was raised in the rural foothills of the California Sierras, where gold rush and Native American artifacts still abound. A carpenter by trade, he has lived in Montana for most of 2 decades. His writing has appeared in Gray's Sporting Journal, Outside, Sports Afield, and Montana Quarterly, among others. Cloudmaker is his second novel, Painted Horses was his first. And Ron Fitzgerald originally hails from Pennsylvania, but found his true home in the mountains of Montana, as a lot of us have. A graduate of the Juilliard playwriting program, Ron's plays have been produced by theaters across the country, including the Eugene O'Neill Theater and Studio Dante and the Montana Repertory Theater. Ron got his start in television, writing for multiple seasons of the dark comedy Weeds, and went on to write for Friday Night Lights, The United States of Terra, Last Resort, and Westworld. Most recently, Ron is the co-creator and showrunner of the HBO hit series Perry Mason, amazing, and is a 2-time WGA Award nominee. So with that, welcome Malcolm and Ron.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
Lauren disappeared. Now what? Now we're screwed.
I think it's just us.
Yeah, I know, right?
How you doing?
Good. Should we have a word from our sponsor?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Delicious Highlander, as featured in the amazing work Cloudmaker, Highlander beer.
Absolutely.
Montana's own.
Yep. Since 1910, I actually have this vintage can of what it looked like back in the day.
That's cool. Where'd you find that?
I can't exactly remember. Probably because I'd had too many Highlanders when I stumbled across this. But no, I think I found this when I was bird hunting one day, around, if I'm remembering this right, around an old, sort of abandoned homestead. And the reason Ron and I decided to do this is because Highlander kind of figures semi-prominently in the novel. One of the characters in there is a fan. And this one's kind of neat because it's got the old church key punch holes in the bottom of the can. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
Did you ever collect beer cans?
No, I mean, not beyond the old, unique, interesting ones that I stumble across in old, trash middens and whatnot from time to time. I have a few of those, but
I think that I'm going to get asked. Oh, wait, you're going to read. I'm sorry, I'm blabbering away.
Oh no, it's all good. I mean, I don't have to read right now. I can talk a little bit about, a little context for the book. And then I was just going to read from the prologue tonight, given that this is the first sort of inaugural event for this. I thought, why not just begin at the beginning?
Right on. I was going to say, your can, finding the can, it's like, you should tell a story about finding the plane.
Oh, no, that's a good idea. The novel was inspired by these real life kids, teenagers in the Depression in Montana who were building and flying their own Model A Ford powered airplanes. And I knew nothing about this until I went to the Museum of the Rockies for the first time, probably maybe 12 or 14 years ago. And one of these planes, which had been just sort of mothballed in a barn, in a big wheat producing part of Montana called Big Coulee, and it's south of this little tiny town. It's called Rygate, Montana. And some young fellers had built this airplane back in the early 30s, 1933 or 1934, and flew it a couple of times, but it mostly just sat in the family barn for decades. And finally, the family didn't know what to do with it, so they donated it to the Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman. And it's hanging from the ceiling in the Montana room there. And I walked in, saw it, looked at it, and thought, it's obviously a real airplane, but it's also obviously a homegrown airplane. And I knew nothing about this subculture at the time. But I immediately thought, wow, I mean, there's got to be a great story behind that. So at the time, I was in the middle of writing Painted Horses, my first novel. So it was just something that I kind of backburnered for a number of years until it came time to pursue book 2. And that's what I went to. And one thing led to another. I found out about another of these planes, and the builder of that had a really interesting backstory. His name was David Comstock. He grew up in Roundup, Montana, and there's a lot of archival research on him. So much of that is what I was able to use as sort of background information for how to pull the book off. So at any rate, I mean, if I'm going to read right now, I'll start with the prologue. And again, I guess I should also say that, you know, when I started to try to conjure a way to approach this book, I thought, well, what if Mark Twain had been writing about kids in the golden age of aviation and the Depression instead of kids in the antebellum South? I mean, how might that look? And so that was sort of my guiding idea behind how to approach the book. So I'll go ahead and just read the prologue. And in the beginning of this, what's happening is the main character, his name is Houston Finn, and his sort of precocious literary buddy, Raleigh, has nicknamed him Huck. So that was kind of an easy way for me to connect it to the notion of a Mark Twain style book. And what they're doing here is attempting to fly a glider that Huck has built at the age of 14 in secret. And they try to launch this in the middle of the night to avoid the town constable. So I'll just pick it up from there. Scorpio slides down and Orion stalks up, and the stars in the October sky otherwise align. An 8-cylinder Buick Roadster with out-of-state plates and nails and 2 tires had limped in off the highway at dusk. She rests now 9 hours later in the wash of light from the open door of the shop. New tubes in place and the convertible top down, and the rightful owner in a boarding house not 2 blocks away, unaware of his contribution to any of this. The kid hits the ignition and the cold car jolts and roars like a cat. Withered leaves jump in a blast of exhaust, and he works the pedal, feels as much as hears the engine's high-tuned rumble. The leaves skitter again. He's endured months for hope of this moment exactly, and with the Montana winter lurking just to the north, he knows it's either now or hold off until spring. Eternity to a 14-year-old. Here is the fastest car to appear in Big Coulee in at least a year. He's actually gone so far as to pray for such, and with the prize dropped right in his lap, he can't help believe he's received not simply an answer, but a bona fide green light from God. Even Pop knows the score, put him on the Pierce tires with a wink and a nod, and made himself conspicuously scarce. He backs the car around the side of the shop, and Raleigh appears like a red ghost in the taillights. Behind him, the wide wing of the glider, a fainter red blur against the night. Huck walks back, and the two of them wordlessly take opposite sides and roll the ship forward. Tiny spoked wheels greased and silent, the luminous sailcloth bobbing. Looks like a gall-darn giant moth, Raleigh mumbles. And he's right, or at least not wrong, or at least not wrong in this diffuse red light. Still, glider number 1 looks to Huck entirely of a piece with the legendary experimental flyers of Orville and Wilbur Wright from 4 decades past, with its overhead wing and skeletonized rib section connecting the tail and rear flaps to the operator's chair. Actually, nothing more than a plank atop the axle and a corresponding plank out front for a footrest. Only the cookie-cutter wheels appear truly misfit, repurposed as they are from a baby buggy, and looking absurdly out of scale beneath 23 feet of wingspan. He wonders if this occurs to Raleigh as well. They hitch 40 feet of hemp line to the bumper and attach the tag to another 10 of shot cord with a spliced steel ring at each end, the second of which mates to a release in the ship's footrest. Raleigh straightens up. All set? Huck weaves between cables, ducks beneath the wing. He settles to the narrow plank and reaches for the leather helmet, on self-administered loan from the high school football supply. He screws the helmet down and cinches the strap. He peers up at Raleigh. How do I look? Like Tom Swift in his airship. Raleigh looks over at the bungalow, dark as a morgue. Reckon your pap's watching? Huck tests the scissor-like levers jutting between his thighs, works the pair of them back and forth. He can feel the tips of the wing torque and twist through the tension of the cables. Pop? Far as I know, Pop's been in bed since 9. That is our story. You ready? Born ready. Remember, middle of the street, get me under the wires at second and light her up. 40 by 4th, 40 by 4th. Way I've got her figured, I can cut loose by the time you get to the church, and you can hook south and sneak on back. I'll sail out over the ball diamond and set her down. Don't crash. I might. Don't die. I won't. Raleigh crawls out in first gear with the headlamps cut and the parking lamps low. The slack goes out of the rope, and the rope comes off the ground and tightens into the shock cord, stretches the elastic out of the cord, and yanks the glider forward in a jump. Huck hears the shift into second, and steady they roll down the street. I'm going to go ahead and stop there, but yeah.
There it is.
There it is.
You're off, so to speak.
And they're off.
And they're off. There it is. I think it's funny that, like, for me, like, you know, we were joking around about the old found can, but it's like, seems to me like so much a part of writing, well, I'll just talk about writing because it's really all I know about. It is these weird things you find in the course of your life that you sock away,
Yeah.
You know? And somehow they spark stories, you know, and it comes out. I think it was, you referencing Mark Twain to me is so interesting. I remember, I mean, you know, so many, we read Huck Finn, we read all this stuff, but I remember reading Roughing It was like huge.
Totally.
You know, like that I was like, wow, this is just a different world.
Yeah.
You know, of what that spirit of adventure, which I think is so much of what Cloudmaker is about, and about faith and about other things.
Sure.
But I think that's so funny, like our little treasures that we find in our travels, you know, and we stick them in our little memory sacks, you know.
Yeah, and it's so funny that you mentioned Roughing It, because I actually did do one preliminary event like this, but it was specifically with members of the California Independent Booksellers Association. And it was back in October, I think. And the subject of Mark Twain came up, and someone asked, what is your favorite Mark Twain book? And Roughing It was exactly what I said.
Amazing book.
Yeah.
It's an amazing book. It's that spirit of adventure. It's a different time and place. I mean, that's I think it's just funny that we like become fixated on these stories from the past because we feel that they inform our present, you know?
Yep.
And it's just like, I don't know, it's funny.
Yeah. And that, I mean, it's great that you say that. I mean, again, it's another thing you and I have never really talked about, but that's kind of a recurring thread that runs through both of my books, I think, is how does the past affect the present? Because it's all building blocks, you know, one atop the other. And the fact that we're here right now, I mean, the staircase to how we got here is pretty fascinating once you start to look back.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. We are, because you do spend a lot of time going, how the hell did we get here? What the hell is going on? You know?
Yeah. Well, it's so easy just to take, you know, for granted what the modern age looks like, with light switches and running water and insulation in the walls and, you know, instant music piped in. And and then, you know, obviously the ability to do this is sort of like taking it to a whole other level.
Oh man. Yeah. The like when a plane hadn't existed. I mean, it's weird to think that there's certainly stuff that my wife's grandma, she lived to be, I think, 103. And when you've had that much life, you realize that in your lifetime, things were invented and became obsolete.
Right.
You know, and that's kind of mind blowing to me, that it's not even like, you know, I remember when the iPhone was invented. Yeah, but it's still here. It's not like, you know.
Yeah. And I know you and I, you know, talked about this once before, but in 1991, I was in Cody, Wyoming, and I went to a barbecue and I met a lady who was 100 years old. She had been born in 1891 in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and she was just absolutely sharp as a tack and had just this unbelievable ability to tell stories about what life had been like during this span of time that had elapsed between, you know, her own childhood and the present day. And, you know, she at that time, in 1901, there was this famous, incident between the Wyoming Stock Growers Association and what they called nesters, these sort of small ranchers there. And they hired Tom Horn ostensibly to come in and rout out cattle rustlers and whatnot. And he wound up being accused of and ultimately convicted for shooting a 14-year-old boy in the course of this. And this lady remembered that whole incident. And it was such a complete trip to talk to somebody who had basically grown up in a time that we almost consider sort of mythic at this point.
Yeah. That's the thing. That's the funny thing about it when it gets these events or the past, it achieves this mythic quality.
Mm-hmm.
And then you find yourself going, but what you really don't want to do, you don't want to talk about the myth because we know the myth.
Right.
What's the humanity behind it, underneath it, or whatever? What's the humanity looking up at it? I mean, certainly in your book, you use Amelia Earhart. Obviously, Lindy's out there. Both of our stuff, we talk about Sister Alice. I mean, you directly, me indirectly.
Sure.
But I mean, Perry Mason himself's a myth, right? So it's to me, it's like we struggle to. The interesting stuff is the humanity of it, right? And I think that's maybe why I like Roughing It so much, because it's not Tom Sawyer. It's not like that thing that had been elevated. It's just regular,
right? Yeah, and there are these like interesting little asides in Roughing It too that sort of deflate the myth, where he's talking about buying his first 6-shooter to go on this excursion from Missouri across the west to the gold country in Northern California, where I'm from. And he's talking about having this pistol, and he said it was so grand. The only problem with it was you could not hit anything with it, and it just sort of undercuts the.
It was fun to shoot anyway.
Yeah.
Come on, I have to be careful because you often bring up questions in our conversation that I want to refer back to the book, but I don't want to blow plot points.
Oh.
So I'm always like, I don't want to ask that.
I don't know. I think we should just go for it. I mean,
because we were talking the other day about the horseback ride to the ticker tape parade that those kids took,
right?
Which is kind of an example of what you're talking about with that. You should tell that story.
Yeah, well, I mean, there were these. There's a sequence in the book. It's basically backstory. It's a flashback basically, and it's Huck's father, Roy, and I have him in order to escape an impending orphanage situation. He rides on horseback from Texas to Montana. And the first time I had ever heard of a situation like that, it was in the book We Pointed Them North by Teddy Blue Abbott, who did that when he was 10, but admittedly it was on a part of a cattle drive. But there was a situation where there were a couple of kids named Bud and Temple Abernathy, and they were the sons of a U.S. Marshal who was widowed in Oklahoma. And their father was a close friend of Teddy Roosevelt's, and this is first decade of the 1900s, so first decade of the 20th century. And at one point, their dad, Jack Abernathy, had to go from Oklahoma to Santa Fe on some kind of official business. And when he came back, he told the boys that there were these fruit orchards there that they would be really amazed by. And they said, well, we'd like to see them. And the kids at that point were 5 and 9. And he was just like, well, saddle up and ride out there and see them. And so they did. And these two 5 and 9-year-old boys rode something like 800 or 900 miles out to Santa Fe by themselves and back again. So that was kind of what gave me the idea for that particular story. And also just the fact that such a thing would actually have been achievable by the right kid back then.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, right? That's the myth, but then you personalize it. You make it, happen to somebody that in the world that you're creating.
Sure.
And suddenly it's like, it becomes, I don't know, more. It's weird. How do you get to be more than a myth? But
Right.
it does.
Yeah. Well, I think I guess what I, have try to do is just start to treat these characters um, like people that I might know today, and put myself into their, and breathe like real human dimensions into them, come up with cool dialogue for them, and just put them in situations that are not really directly related to the bigger picture of what's going on with the mythic dimensions of it, but just show them being real people.
Well, that's the thing. How do you make something real? And I notice you have your cameraman hard at work over there.
Yeah, we're having some minor technical issues.
Okay, man. That's what it's showbiz, baby. No, I mean, that's what you're like. What do you? I think anybody. Well, I don't know. Maybe it's a question. I know certainly in what I do in television, that anything I'm trying to do, no matter what genre, no matter what situation, I'm trying to make it real.
Right.
And I would assume that's the same for you. It doesn't matter. You could be writing any point in time, any person, anything. You want it to be real.
Yeah.
Be real.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's very true. I mean, I have, I guess, kind of my most conscious consideration as far as the writing process goes is just to create interesting sentences on the page that turn into interesting paragraphs, that turn into interesting pages, and so on. But always, within that framework, it's trying to make three-dimensional characters, multi-dimensional characters who think and talk and just sort of have, I guess I know like a big influence on me when it comes to building character is probably Quentin Tarantino, because he was the first person I can remember who would throw you into a scene in something like, True Romance or Reservoir Dogs or whatever early on, in which the characters are just sort of talking about stuff that really has zero to do with the actual arc of the story. But by breathing that kind of life into them as individuals, it just has this greater than the sum of its parts contribution to the end result.
100%, 100%. Because I mean, they always say characters revealed through action, right? But at the same time, it's like the action of telling a story, a throwaway, something that doesn't seemingly connect to anything. What it's doing is revealing things. I mean, if everything we've all seen, read, whatever, experienced things where every single moment is on the nose, it becomes not real because life is not that way.
Yeah, that's totally true. I mean, and if you're talking about say crisis in a crisis as a driver of plot, you can't just totally focus on the crisis all the time. It's because otherwise you wind up with a situation in which your characters who are facing the crisis don't appear to be real people. So you're less invested in their crisis because of that.
Right. Yeah. It gets pitched too high. And then it has to, there's a certain level you can't exceed unless they're superhuman or,
sure,
deities or whatever. I agree with that. We're all looking for an experience outside of ourselves, I think, but also an experience that we can relate to.
Yeah, totally.
Did I live in 19 whatever? No. Well, 19 whatever, yes. But did I live in 1930s? No. But I can relate to everybody in your book.
Yeah.
Those are, if they're not things that I feel personally, I feel like they're people I know,
Sure.
In some variant. I mean, because, whatever, you talk about Roundup or any place with Big Coulee where these guys are. Had I ever been there in my life before I came here? I mean, no. I grew up, we talked about this. We're both from the Philadelphia area originally.
Yep.
So it's like, I'm a city kid. What I thought were mountains were apparently very low hills. So until I got here, I was like, gee.
Yeah. I was fortunate because, my extended family is from the, greater Philadelphia area, mostly in South Jersey, and then some in Lancaster County and whatnot. And I spent the first 9 of my 10 years of life there. And then my parents moved across the country and we wound up in Northern California. And that just dovetailed really well with what my sort of existing sensibility was in terms of, I mean, I loved Westerns as a kid.
Yeah.
Even though I wasn't living in the region of the West.
Yeah.
I mean, I was really attracted to the myth of the West. So when we as a family packed up and had this Western excursion, it kind of cemented this sensibility for me, I think. And then we did wind up, in the foothills of the Sierras in sort of, fairly grandiose country there as well.
For sure, man. Yeah, the whole thing is like, what does life add up to, right? What does your life add up to? How does it influence everything you do? Because I think often people are like, how do you get an idea for whatever? Or what makes you write something like whatever? And I think so many times it's like, well, it's still me. It's still based on my experiences and my interpretation of my experiences.
Sure.
I'm just extending that web outwards, right? To include these people.
Yeah.
I think you make yourself, like, people ask a lot of stuff about writing and stuff. And I think always the thing is you're already a little crazy to start with. And then you kind of make yourself go crazier because all these things, everything that's in this book is real. I mean, more real to you than it is to me because you lived it, you know what I mean? And it's real to me, but everything in there has to be real to you for you to write it. So that's the definition of an insane person, isn't it? A person who believes in this entirely fictitious realm that they've created,
And I spent, a lot of time inside my own. I mean, I was an odd kid for sure. I mean, I can remember my brothers, getting like a Nintendo for the first time and just being completely immersed in that thing. But I had been, sort of already reading, stuff about the frontier and whatnot. And I'd be in the backyard trying to start a fire with a bow and drill just to figure out how to do it, So, yeah. And I don't know totally, what the origination point is for a lot of it. But I think like the sensibility that leads a person to head down this road probably happens before you're ever really even conscious of it.
It's got to be. I mean, I remember jumping off the garage roof with an umbrella thinking I would float down because I'd seen it on, Mary Poppins or something. I'm like, it's got to work. Why wouldn't it work? It did not work.
Now that's falling for the myth right there.
I totally fell 100%. I was lying there on the ground going, why didn't that work? You want to do a question? Here's a question.
Yeah.
What is the gestation period for a book like Cloudmaker? And would you say it was a difficult birth?
Well, the gestation period for it was a fits and starts one on this particular book because I had this encounter with this sort of totemic thing, this airplane, years before I actually started to really think hard about the book because I was in the middle of my first book when I first saw it. And then once I got really serious about trying to learn enough about this airplane and where it might have come from, it honestly went pretty quickly. I mean, I hashed out a sort of, overall arc fast, within a couple of months probably. And then there was, some fairly significant deep dive research parts of it that had to happen just to be able to write about this whole phenomenon of being able to home build an airplane. And I had to learn things about airplane construction and had to go back, clear to the Orville and Wilbur days on the research basis, just to be able to understand the technical aspects of it, to be able to write about it.
Sure.
So there was that. But as far as coming up with the overall like plot thread and the various different, subplots and whatnot that all sort of wind up weaving together in it, the basis for all of it came together fairly quickly. And then, I think you always get to a point where you have unanswered questions or questions you don't even know are going to occur to you yet. And that just has to be dealt with as you're in the writing process.
Yeah, the discoveries. You have to leave room for the discoveries. I mean, that's 99% of it, right? It's like,
yeah,
I didn't know that person was going to say that or do that or whatever.
right.
That's why you're an insane person. that's
yeah.
why you're crazy. I think it's funny to talk about, and it's a totally legit question, obviously, but gestation periods. And I think oftentimes it's like, wow, how old am I today? That's how long, like, you know what I mean? Like in a weird way, it's like, sure that you saw that airplane and that was that nugget, but the story that emerged from that little seed of the airplane, like, you know what I mean? Like the nutrients were in the earth and blah, blah, blah. I'm ruining this freaking metaphor, but like, it's just like, it's your whole life. You didn't, for some reason you saw that thing and you went, huh, even though you're in the middle of a totally other project, you're in the middle of this other book that has nothing to do with this airplane, but something in you goes, I don't know why, but I gotta grab that. And then,
I just remember thinking, wow, I mean, how have I never heard about this before? I mean, as both a singular artifact and also whatever phenomenon must have existed back then that was motivating people to do something that extreme.
Yeah, it's insane. Someone says, I'm going to build something that lifts me way the fuck up in the way up in the air. I'm gonna build this thing, and it's gonna be, and then I'm gonna get in it. I'm gonna get in it and give it a whirl, because why not?
Oh yeah, and then that's the really remarkable thing about David Comstock, the 17-year-old kid who built the plane that's now it's been restored and it's housed in the Muscle Shoals County Historical Museum in Roundup. He built this thing in less than a year. He was just an absolutely driven kid, had no formal flight lessons whatsoever, but he was really smart and really savvy, and he taught himself to fly this thing totally independent of any kind of formal instruction. And when I started to read about him and research his life, a lot of the pieces just were able to come together for me relative to the book by sort of borrowing from his life story.
I think those are awesome moments when that, like, it just starts to snap into place, because it's like you're wandering around, you're picking up these puzzle pieces and you have no idea. And like, I don't know about you, my life is full of people who think I'm insane, but like, so you're doing this thing, you don't know if it's ever going to add up to anything. And then all of a sudden you're like, it just clicks into this thing and you go, oh yeah, that's what the hell that is.
Yeah. And that happened for me. I mean, I had already, come up with a pitch for the novel to be able to try to present it to my publisher, and went over to Bozeman to the Museum of the Rockies and got into the actual documentary archive that they had on that airplane. And there was a bunch of David Comstock stuff in there. And one of the things was a letter that he had written in 1984 when he was retired at that point, but it was a letter to the museum advising them on how to deal with this plane that had been donated to them. But there were so many fascinating details in this one letter that as soon as I read the letter, I was like, I know I have a novel now.
Which is great, because it's like it's something that's become, I think, a little bit devalued in our society today. The importance of historians, the importance of librarians, the importance of people teachers, the importance of the people who collect and preserve these things.
Right.
Because it's like we were talking before about building upon the past, about how does it influence us today? And without these documents, it wouldn't have the truth. It wouldn't bleed the right color blood or something. You know what I mean? It wouldn't.
Yeah. No, I think that's totally true. And I mean, and I, in the acknowledgments of the book, I mean, I really try to mention everybody in there who had like a real sense of the history of that era. And I should bring this up now before I forget, but one of the most amazing parts of the writing process was I wound up in contact with a high school classmates of David Comstock, a lady named Betty Wetzel.
Wow.
And she was 99 or 100 when I went and interviewed her. And again, just absolutely sharp as a tack. And she had flown with them in the thing as a teenage girl.
Wait, I'm not gonna say anything. I'm not gonna say anything because it's a very cool part of the book. But did that come from that?
No. It was a combination of those two things. It was that in conjunction with another detail that David had noted.
Wow.
Which, yeah.
It's so important.
But I mean, I think David died in probably 2004 or 5. And I didn't have any notion that anyone who had known him actually witnessed the airplane in its, original flying days was still alive. And then somebody landed on an interview with this lady, Betty Wetzel, who was living up in Big Fork. And she mentioned, and so I wound up contacting her and went and spent an afternoon with her. And it was just the most amazing thing because she was a direct link to this bygone time.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. I mean, for when I was researching the early 30s, the expression, all that stuff, you go into all the WPA stuff, and there's so many of the oral histories, and I find myself often wishing we still did that. I know now we have video, and you can find a lot of stuff. I don't know. There was something, I don't know. It felt different. There's something that felt different about.
Definitely. I mean, another big thing for me that was completely out of the blue, but it was incredibly valuable, was discovering my wife's grandmother's high school yearbooks from Flathead High, 1929 to 1932.
Wow.
And they were fascinating. I mean, just they were like this little mini archive, and the kids would write multiple inscriptions to each other, and then you could sort of follow the inscriptions year to year and piece together these sort of little teenage dramas that they were having. And it was stuff like, trying to track down bootleg hooch on the weekends and crashing Model A's. And I mean, it was just amazing to get into that and really, really study them. And it gave me a little more confidence, I think, in the way that I was attempting to depict teenagers of that era.
Oh, that's important for sure. Did you find I know sometimes for me, they don't, when you're trying to picture the person.
Yeah.
I'm not so personally, I'm not the most visual person. I hear things. I hear the people talk. I hear that's what I hear. I don't necessarily see it that way, but there always, for me at least, there's a moment when I do see it, it happens, and I see the person, and I go, oh my God. And a lot of times it happens flipping through an old year, but flipping through something, and I go, that's so-and-so. That's who they are.
Yeah.
And it's like the final step. I don't know, in a weird way. Suddenly it's like, now I see them walking and talking,
Oh yeah. No, I've done that a number of times where I'll have a character that's in progress or whatever, and I have a visual impression of what that person, must look like. And then all of a sudden you'll spot that actual person or meet that actual person, and it just gels. You're like, boom, you are the person I've been writing about.
Right on.
It's kind of a strange thing when that happens.
Here's another question. Hey, Malcolm, you do an amazing job of placing these characters in the 1930s. How did you recreate the lived experience of that period so convincingly? Well, we were kind of just talking about that, I guess. Sorry, Ken, yeah. I didn't read the question before. We kind of talked about it.
Yeah, definitely. And I had similar questions like that when I finished my first book, Painted Horses, which is set in the 1950s. And a lot of it just comes from sort of immersing yourself in the films and the books and the magazines and whatever source material exists from those particular eras, and then trying to cut away some of the filtering that would have been involved in publications and whatnot there. Right. But then you can also, access things that are more personal and private, like yearbooks or diaries or, letters. And, and you start to get a sense, pretty quickly that people then were very similar to people in all eras, really.
Yeah, I mean, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, right? We're all after the same things on some level. I mean,
Yeah,
the methods change, the means change, but it's the same goals.
right.
I mean, it's kind of funny to go through. You're writing 37, right? I'm 32.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like you're in that. You think like, well, what do I have to say about the depression? What blah blah blah. And I know it's not the same, but you hit something like COVID. You hit something like everything we went through, and you can see that every generation might have their thing, their event, or whatever they are, and they're all gonna, some might be a war, some might be a depression, some might be a bizarre pandemic. They're still tied together in their own way because they affect everything that goes on.
Yeah, I mean, one of the strangest dimensions of having written this book when I did, to me, is now having spent the last year in the first really big pandemic since 1918, because one of my characters in the book is a survivor of the 1918 Spanish flu. But that was written several years ago now, before we saw any of what we've all been enduring for the last year on the horizon. And in order to, I guess, understand what that was like, I mean, the biggest source for it was a novella by Catherine Ann Porter called Pale Horse, Pale Rider. She was a survivor of the 1918 flu as I think 20 or 22-year-old woman. And that's why her hair was completely white as a young. That's where I got that detail from this character in the book. So yeah, I mean, just sort of strange things like that are beyond the realm of even like, how do you even process or describe that? I mean,
Absolutely.
Yeah,
it's a different level of I want to say tough in a way.
Yeah.
It's a different level of tough. I have well, he's passed now. I had a good friend who told me a story about how lifelong kind of conflict with his dad, right? And at some point, right just before his dad dies, he finds out that he is one of two surviving like children, like that there had been like 7 kids,
Yeah.
but 5 of them died.
Yeah.
And in that moment, he got everything about his dad. He got like all their problems, all the it was like, oh my God, I didn't know that I had 5 siblings. And it was just more back when that happened. It was more common. It was like, yeah,
totally.
Some live, some die.
No, I mean, one thing that I was always interested in old cemeteries and things, and having, grown up in fairly old places. I mean, there was an old cemetery down the street from us where I was in New Jersey as a really little kid. And I'd go look at in fact, there was a headstone in my neighbor's yard and the death date, I mean, was crazy. It was like 1829 or something. And I just remember thinking, wow, it's so long ago, and then once I got to be a teenager in Northern California, it was all gold rush. It's gold rush country. It's El Dorado County. My high school was 7 miles from Sutter's Mill, which is the gold discovery site. But there are cemeteries all over there, and you start to really nose around, and it's just like, oh wow, this kid died when he was 5.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, wait a minute, there's a sibling who died when she was 3. And there's like, holy mackerel, there's another one. And you're just like, wow, I mean, people must have been surrounded by tragic, untimely deaths as a de rigueur part of life back then.
Yep. And then also, cemetery is a great place to get names.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If you're looking for names for characters, it's a great place.
It's true.
Yeah.
I mean, especially if you're trying to assign like a historically appropriate name to somebody, because the trends in names have definitely changed.
They have
again and again.
Yeah. Yeah. What's the one your character? Oh shoot! He calls himself Yakima, but his name's Anus for real. And that just always cracks you up, you know. I mean, heck, I remember Dukes of Hazzard, so it's not that strange to me. Although when I was a little kid, that I thought that was the most hilarious thing ever, that someone could be named Anus. I don't know.
Well, yeah, and my exposure to that was the Dukes of Hazzard as a kid, where the deputy's name was Enos, and and we all as kids were like, "Is that a real name?" You know,
that's what I'm saying. Yeah, totally. Yeah. All right, here we go. Question: mysticism plays a feature role in Cloudmaker, from evangelical revivals to the electrified ghost of Amelia Earhart. Is there a particular quality to the Western landscape and/or ethos that lends itself to mysticism for you?
Ooh, that's kind of a tough question. I mean, I have certainly been in places in the American West that have an extremely mystical energy about them. One of the most obvious ones would be the Medicine Wheel in the Bighorn Mountains. It's up about 10,000 feet, and the knowledge, the basic understanding of it, as I am currently aware, is that it was not built by any of the contemporary tribes that we know of. So it's associated, you know, I mean, many of the Plains tribes have a affiliation with it and just believe that it was built by a sort of ancestral band of people. But the times that I've been there have all been just alive with some kind of charged energy. Some of the buffalo jumps that I've been to are the same way. And I don't know so much that the American West has a unique corner on that. I mean, I've never been to any of I've never personally been to any of the prehistoric painted caves in Europe. But I would have to assume that if you encountered that stuff in face-to-face contact, it would have to have a sort of an eerie mystical charge to it. Or, you know, the pyramids in Egypt, the pyramids in Central America or South America, I would sure have to assume that certain cemeteries have that.
Without a doubt, there's an energy.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, we all know that. I don't care what you believe. There's an energy, whatever you want to call it, that's fine. But like, you feel it in certain places.
I guess, I mean, the one thing that I can maybe speculate on about the American West is because it is a vast landscape. You know, you fly over in an airplane, and I mean, it's big out here. Yeah. So when you encounter something that is clearly like a remnant from a human population that we have no real memory of, there is you know, out in all this vastness, it's eerie. There's something eerie about it.
Right. It's like technology was invented and then became obsolete. And it's like people existed and then were gone.
Yeah, and they had lives, and you know, and now they had lives, they had families, they had, you know, struggles, they had happy times, they had, you know, euphoria, they had, you know, the array of a human life, and now we can only speculate on who they were and what their days look like.
And how much technology the aliens gave them. I mean,
you know, the times that I've found like projectile points and things like that are also very almost mystical moments in a way, where you just, you know, you reach down and touch this stone object for the first time in who knows how many centuries, and something goes through you with that stuff.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Here's one for you. Curious, have you flown in a small plane?
I've not flown in an open cockpit plane like I'm writing about in the book, but I've flown in small aircraft before. Yeah.
Oh, wait, did I do it? Descriptions of flight and problems encountered. Oh, because you did such a good job on the flight problems and everything, especially, well, can't blow pot, but you do. It's true. There is a very, like, how did that research go? Were you just talking to people, or?
Yeah. Talking to pilots, and then I had it, you know, once all of the actual scenes were written and there was a full draft of the book, I had a pilot who I thank in the acknowledgments. His name's Ralph Bronson, and and he vetted it for me. And he was a licensed, he'd been a licensed pilot for like 50 years or something. And everything from flying every type of aircraft under the sun. He was licensed to fly a helicopter. He was licensed to fly, jets, but he flew small prop planes and just knew it inside and out. And so he was absolutely instrumental in making sure that it read appropriately.
Yeah, because it's something we ran into Perry Mason. It's like, I don't want the lawyers going, that's bullshit. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you were like, I don't want the pilots going, that's bullshit.
Oh yeah, no, that was very foremost in my mind, that it's got to have an authenticity, to it. It's got to be vetted by a person or people who know a lot more than I do about the reality of this.
Well, and at the same time, it has to still be accessible to people like me who have no flipping idea.
Exactly. And that's kind of the high wire act that you wind up on as a person who's trying to make basically it's a popular entertainment, that needs to also not be dismissible out of hand by people who know what they're actually looking at.
For sure. We should props again for Highlander.
Absolutely.
As featured in the Malcolm Brooks novel, Cloudmaker. Just keep giving those props. You mentioned a second ago when you were talking about laying out the scenes for the book. Is that how do you? I'm curious because I have no idea how to write a novel. How do you block it out? Do you outline the thing? Do you block out scenes? How does it work?
A little bit of both. For Painted Horses, the first novel, I had a little more of an actual sort of hard and fast outline at the front end of it. With Cloudmaker, it was a little more organic than that. I had a sort of an arc that I knew I wanted to achieve, and I'm sure I took notes on that, but not copiously. I basically, once I started writing it, I just sat down and wrote it. And both novels were written in a very linear fashion, even though they're not very linear books in certain ways. Painted Horses is definitely, it jumps around a lot, and there's this sort of novel and a novel structure to it. But that said, it was written in sequence that it currently exists in. I would just get to a point where I knew I wanted to rewind and hit a flashback scene and have that appear here. So I'd write up to that point, write the flashback, and then jump right back into the now time of the story and just keep going with it. And
do you prefer one over the other? Do you prefer the hardcore outline to the I'm not asking you which book you enjoyed writing more.
Right.
I'm just saying.
I don't know if I can really say that I favor one over the other. I think that the one worked better for the type of novel that it is, because it is a little less linear in its arc. Yeah. Whereas with Cloudmaker, it wasn't as necessary to have a really serious set of notes at the front end. I knew where I was going with it, and I was able to just mostly kind of write it in the order that it occurs.
That makes sense. That makes sense. A lot of sense. Do you find that you have to, like you mentioned earlier about writing the proposal for Cloudmaker?
Yeah.
And I'm assuming, not to be crass, to get the advance so that you could actually go write the book.
Sure.
Is that a sucky part of the experience, or is it?
No, actually, that's a great question at this juncture, because now that you say it, the proposal, that was doing the work of writing an outline, honestly. Yeah. I had these ideas and I fleshed them out in this 8 or 10 page proposal. And then I just used that as a template to get the actual writing done.
Right on. Score one for the publishers. Here's a question. Annalise is an amazing character and a perfect counterpoint to Huck. How did you discover that character?
Actually, Annalise is a variation of Beryl Markham. And the way that I conceived of Annalise. Beryl Markham, for people who may not know, was the first woman, actually she was the first pilot, period, male or female, to fly across the Atlantic from east to west. She flew from England, and her intention was to fly to New York. She wound up crash landing in Nova Scotia. But she was the first person to do that. She had been raised in Kenya, in which at the time was called British East Africa. And her father was a farmer and thoroughbred horse trainer. And I don't remember the exact details, but her mother was not in the picture after her very early childhood. So she was raised exclusively by her extremely permissive, hands-off father. And Beryl Markham wound up becoming this almost mythical, figure in aviation, and then also in horse training later. And when I conceived of Annalise, I was like, what if Beryl Markham, instead of having been raised by a pretty much hands-off father, was raised by a sort of micromanaging mother figure, but set of parents in general? What would that have? What would Beryl Markham look like if that was her background? And that's how I initially contrived her.
Right on.
Yeah.
Research. Again, props to the historians and the librarians and the teachers. Thank you for
absolutely
teaching us and writing that shit down.
Yep.
Because otherwise it was good. It's like why I love that. I love dumb reality shows. Because I don't know about you, but like sometimes I'm like, God dang, am I sick of fiction? Because you can't help yourself. You start taking it apart, when you look at it or read it or whatever.
Yeah.
So like for me, I love American Pickers because you learn so much about weird history. And I'm like, wow, I didn't know anything about any of this shit.
No, stuff like that in specific that uses this, Americana, it's sort of excursion into Americana, into the dark, into the dustbins of American history, where the ones that I love are where they find an old motorcycle in a barn, because it's just classic trope,
Yeah. And it's just been sitting there.
Yeah.
Or, somebody valued it and they kept it. That's what I love about it. And then that love got passed down. It's like we were talking about the rocks and the energy, right? Maybe that happened with that rock that you touched.
Sure.
Somebody cared about it. It was important.
Mm-hmm.
And that transferred and got carried, and it just sat there, and then along came and touched it.
Yeah. And there's a story in it, it's that old cliche of, if only this thing could talk.
Right.
What could it tell you?
100%.
So, I guess part of what a writer does is give things like that a voice that otherwise doesn't really exist.
Right, Chad? Or at least we try.
Yeah. That's the intent.
That's the intent, for sure. I'm not seeing any more questions. There don't seem to be any questions out there unless people are firing them into the chat. Oh, wait, here it comes.
Oh, I'm just appearing on screen now.
Hi.
It's magic, the magic of Zoom.
You're Highlander.
We should probably wrap this up, but I did have a question for the two of you, just for me and for the people who may not know. How did you guys meet? What is your relationship as a TV writer and a novelist?
Oh, it's complex. You go, Malcolm, because it really starts.
I used to work in the Top Hat in the 90s, and Ron's wife Carmen was a bartender there. So I've known Ron's wife for 25 years, and somehow I don't even remember like exactly how it happened, but my friend John Bateman, who is a builder here in town, met with Ron and Carmen to do a remodel project. And I think maybe John and Carmen had figured out that there was a connection because they both knew me.
Exactly.
And from there, we just.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. It was hilarious because, by the way, plug for Highlander and for Bateman Building Company. Excellent builders. John Bateman does amazing work. Yeah, and that's how it all happened. That was totally it. And we've been I've been kicking around Montana theater since about 97, 96, 97.
Yeah.
So I would, I've been coming up here for all that stuff, and yeah, that's how it kind of happened. Random.
All right. Yeah. I mean, old top hat stories are amazing. Like I moved to Missoula in like 2009 before the new top hat or the top hat was renovated. And I missed the wood floors and that stage and the graffiti bathrooms.
Yeah. No, there's some crazy stories from back in the day. The bar that's currently, that big fancy bar that Steve Gard he bought out of Wyoming, I think. And it was in pieces down in the basement of that place for years. Yeah. And we kept talking about, we should just tear the old one out and put that one in. And my tenure there didn't last long enough to get to that point, but eventually that's what happened.
Oh yeah. That's like, well, whatever. It's like anybody who's watching this, who knows downtown Missoula, there's definitely been a change in Missoula as a whole. A lot of those 80s room, like all those places, Elbow Room, those are gone.
Yeah.
These places, but it's like, it's a different kind of thing, I guess. And then there's still, so a little less vomit, a little more martinis, I guess. These days kind of seems to be, you can get more cheese than you ever could.
That's a good t-shirt. I should reach out to Nick Chakota and say,
there you go.
A little less vomit, a little more cheese.
Yeah. Missoula,
Montana.
Missoula, Montana. Come check it out.
Oh my god.
Come for the cheese, stay for less vomit.
I don't know how this conversation started. Thank you, Malcolm and Ron, for being here tonight. And thank you everyone watching. This was such a lively conversation. Just a reminder, you can purchase Cloudmaker on Fact and Fiction's website, factandfictionbooks.com. And with I should mention that the person who won a free copy, which will go out on Monday, Louise, congratulations. You're about to read one heck of a book. Everyone else, please purchase a copy at factandfictionbooks.com. And please remember to enter MBF at checkout. I also urge you to go to montanabookfestival.com to donate so that we can continue events like this one. I think that's it. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Ron, and thanks, Malcolm.
Thank you all for coming.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Congratulations.